Welcome to Volume 3 of Where the Suns Went Wrong in the 2024-25 season. I'm your host, Stephen PridGeon-Garner. This is the PHNX Sports channel. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and once we get done or during the course of the video, if anything piques your interest or you might have a comment you want to leave, make sure you go down to the bottom and leave that comment. I'm always active in there having conversations. Love talking basketball and will almost always engage with it. So let's continue to make the discourse healthy. Let's learn. Let's just kind of combine opinions and just kind of learn from everything. And without further ado, we are going to be looking at the defensive end of the floor for the Phoenix Suns. So let's go ahead and get this video rolling. All right, so in the 2024-25 season for the Phoenix Suns, they left a whole lot more to be desired. Yes, I will start with the fact that they only had such a high ceiling that they could reach, given some of the personnel and roster construction issues that they had in terms of size. They were one of the smaller teams in the league in terms of a combined height as well as a combined wingspan in particular. You put that in tandem with things in terms of their scheme and game flow, and you see cracks in the foundation of that could lend itself to a large amount of inconsistencies, even if the offense was one of the better, if not the best in the league. And as we broke down in the first two episodes, even with the top end talents that they had on offense, even that side of the ball still left a lot more to be desired in consistency, in process, in sustainability, and things like that. So in usage and whatnot. So the offense not being up to par with where it could have and, in my opinion, should have been, in tandem with the defense being severely underwhelming, put them so far behind the eight ball that it was just such a bad way that they couldn't get themselves out of the hole that they dug themselves into. So for statistical purposes, let's go ahead and take a look at the defensive stats for the Phoenix Suns in just a general sense. And then I'll have another graphic to get to shortly after this one. So in this graphic here, we're going to be looking at their defensive rating, half-court defensive rating, deflections per game, and the total deflections for the team. Start with the defensive rating. As you see, 119.2, one of the worst in recent league memory. And obviously, as you can see on the screen here, 27th in the league in non-garbage time minutes. Absolutely non-negotiable, not going to get it done as a playoff team, even as a play-in team. That is extremely, entirely too low. Look below that, look at the half-court defensive rating, and you see that they had a 102.5 rating in non-garbage time minutes. Again, not going to get it done. 30th in the league, the absolute worst half-court defense in the entire NBA. Again, even with their personnel questions and all of the questions I had coming into this season, if you told me that they finished as the worst defensive rating team in the half court in the league, I would have said that's not happening. And I would have been completely wrong on that as well. In tandem with that, we also see 14 deflections per game. Not nearly enough, 29th in the league. And then the last bit for this particular graphic, 1,148 total deflections this season, also ranked 29th. So if the defense is not going to be active, the scheme is not going to be just to maybe create more possessions for yourself, which we'll get into shortly. All those things just kind of compound in this domino effect from there. One thing leading into another, and because of the lack of consistency and honestly the lack of presence, lack of disposition on that end, they found themselves in an extremely bad way. Next graphic we're going to be looking at is their defensive profile, independent of the ranks, but I will include the ranks with these stats just for to contextualize things in terms of league ranks. So looking at their defense in pick and roll in terms of points per possession allowed, they had the 24th ranked defensive pick and roll process in the league, giving up 1.017 points per possession. And like I said, 24th in the league. Not going to get it done. None of the teams that ranked behind them in these ranks made it past the first round of the playoffs. And I think only one team in that group of teams that had a worse pick and roll defense than they did actually even made the playoffs. So just for context on that. Opponent points, paint points, and the field goal percentage with that in a non-restricted fashion. 24th in the league, bottom third. Again, not going to get it done. Teams had access to the paint via cuts, and honestly, any other way in which they may have desired to get to it. Suns didn't put up much of any restraint in terms of that, nor were they the best with containing or contesting those shots as well. So that leads to them giving up a large percentage of points and efficiency, even more so than the points on said shots. And then we get to the three-point line as we venture out from the basket. Start with the corners. They were the second worst team in the league in terms of three-point percentage allowed from the corners. 42.1% for their opponents. 29th in the league. Not going to get it done. That speaks to a team that's slow to get out to the corners if they get out to them at all. Also speaks to a team that was not good and consistent with the helper rotations once the defense had to rotate to put a fire out on the strong side of things like that. And then lastly, to round out this final graphic that I have for you, looking at their above the break three-point percentage. And they were giving up, they were just 22nd in general there. And you see that number and you tie it in with the other numbers that we spoke to in this graphic in particular. And you see just that they left a lot to be desired. And now, as we've done in each of the last two volumes of where the Suns went wrong, let's contextualize them with the happenings on the court. So start with the original roster. You look at their original starting lineup. Yusuf Nurkic, as well as Tyus Jones in the starting lineup with the big three of Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and Kevin Durant. Looks okay on paper. I immediately had questions about what their scheme versatility would be with that group, what the activity would look like with that group, what the impact of that activity, given the lack of size for their starting lineup outside of Durant and Yusuf Nurkic, would look like. And then when teams could press the matchup hunting button and were consistent in that process to almost always involve Tyus Jones with Yusuf Nurkic in pick and roll, what does Nurkic's drop look like? Does it resemble the 23-24 form with Frank Vogel, where he was one of the best drop coverage defenders in the league? Or does it regress back to what he was when he was in Portland, which ultimately ended up in them wanting to get off of his contract? It was a whole lot more of the latter this season and took that to even new extremes than it was the former. But Yusuf Nurkic was not the main culprit in that, because this season, Suns screen navigators, point of attack defenders, wing defenders, either of those two defensive archetypes, simply were not good enough. The multiple efforts needed, the competition level needed from those individuals on a consistent, sustained level just was not there. And some of it, again, is, yes, roster construction. You can only expect such a high ceiling or such a high floor for a group that's kind of offensive-minded and smaller on that side of the spectrum to kind of be able to stay afloat defensively. But you just can't be as bad as they were with not being able to contain the ball and not being able to defend to scheme at the point of attack first and foremost before anywhere else. And because of the lack of roster construction and the sharpness within that, it lent itself to a lot of attention and also a lot of responsibility being put on Yusuf Nurkic. And drop coverage is his cup of tea. It's also Mike Budenholzer's cup of tea in terms of his defensive process. That's not what best suited this particular Suns team, however. Now, if Nurkic was up to touch on the screen all season long and then playing back into the drop sometimes, but kind of also playing a lateral, if you will, where he just slides laterally to keep guards from turning the corner, and sometimes also hedging out, as in stepping up from the level of the screen and being up to touch to then kind of funnel a player to certain pockets of the court, allowing for that guard to navigate screens within all three of those different varying levels of defense. I think that would have helped them a ton, because they just did not have the on-ball coverage needed to be successful in a sustained manner on that end, Because they weren't doing that, though, and it was a lot of times Nurkic playing a little deeper of a drop than he did when he was in the season before last with Frank Vogel, that just opened up options galore for opponents, where the guards had access to the paint, whether they were in ice, where it's like drop towards the outer third of the court, even though a player is still being funneled towards them. Or even same thing if you flip it from ice and you go with weak coverage, and it's still essentially the same thing as drop, and you're just giving direct straight line access with no resistance given from the guards, however. That's the part that's missing from all of that. Drop coverage is only good if you have someone that can navigate the screen well, stay attached to the ball, play with multiple efforts, contest from the rear view, be able to fight back and get up a solid contest even from the front side sometimes, and just generally keep that big from being engaged. Because once that big is engaged, now you put yourself in help to helper scenarios or late switch scenarios. None of those latter 2 points that I made, the Suns were consistently good with this season. And you factor in the length as well, or the lack thereof, from their defense from the guards position, and you see where they had so many inconsistencies that just flowed through. So generally speaking, it was a lack of process from them that did them a severe disservice. And you can look at a mid-November game against the Orlando Magic where they put Oso Iguodala into the game, and you see the change of pace and the positivity and impact and effectiveness that comes from that. And it gives you a template for what they would see success with again in the mid to late March stretch of their regular season schedule, and what I've been kind of speaking to as the direction they should be going with their starting center going into the 2025-2026 season, but also with the new head coach. And that's with scheme versatility. Having a center that can switch, having a center that can cross-match, and having a center that can be just active within all of that. Extremely important. A big that can be up to touch on almost every single pick or every single dribble handoff scenario. Not afraid to switch, can do so if need be, but also can do so in an emergency scenario and be effective there. Give themselves a whole lot more versatility within that. I think that's what should be crowned most important from that center position. And looking at the Oso Iguodala example, in that mid-November matchup with the Orlando Magic, they're getting blitzed by Franz Wagner. He's getting everything he wants in pick and roll, getting to his midi, getting to the paint, posting up smaller guards, manipulating matchups, all of those different things. In comes Oso Iguodala, and the entire game switches the pace, flips on his head, and immediately goes in favor of the Suns. And why is that? Because with Oso Iguodala, although he is undersized at the center position, for what he lacks in terms of size and weight, he has in spades in his IQ, his activity, and his foot speed. All three of those things combining to make him the perfect versatile type of switch big that the Suns greatly benefited from when he was allowed minutes to play in the main rotation this season. The Suns were 9 points better on the defensive end of the floor per 100 possessions when Oso Iguodala was on the floor, in contrast and comparison to when he wasn't on the floor. Those are, like, he was not going to be that in any capacity, nor was he going to make an all-rookie team. But if someone of an all-star level had a +9 if his team was +9 when he was on the court defensively compared to when he was off it, that's defensive player of the year in a historic fashion. And that also complete and specific to Oso speaks to a player that needed to play a whole lot more and playing a whole lot more different lineup combinations to see just how much of that +9 that you could get out of having him on the court for your defense. And him being able to just flatten out the pick and rolls with Franz Wagner it just literally flipped the game on his head. The Suns were able to compile kills, getting 3 or more stops in a row, and then playing off of those stops, scoring, making a comeback, and ultimately winning that mid-November game. And that really just piqued my interest because it was like, for me, they've been getting dinged in pick and roll the entire season up until that point. You get to switching, and whenever Oso comes into the game, even in games prior to that one in mid-November, where he's going up against the likes of Kyrie Irving and getting a stop in the late clock, switching on to Luka Doncic early in the clock after the very first pick and roll is being set, and being able to kind of keep Luka flattened out from turning the corner, make him settle for a highly contested three-point pull-up and getting those stops and being able to help bridge the gap for the defense in terms of versatility. That spoke volumes. Fast forward to March, he makes a return to the rotation, albeit because of injury, and he's able to bring that same dynamic, and it helps to bridge a gap again for a defense that had lost the plot. Drop coverage, not getting it done, but none of the other centers on the group can sustain in terms of their versatility. Oso Iguodala is the template for everything that the Suns should be looking at the center position going into the 2025-26 season and beyond. And I have multiple names in which you can find on our PHNX Sports YouTube channel where I'm speaking about centers and shorts and things like that. But just generally speaking, this 2024-25-26 Suns team was not good defensively because of the personnel, in addition to the scheme and the general lack of size, lack of athleticism, and lack of versatility that they had on the roster. I think that if they were able to get more scheme versatility out of the group that they did have, that would have done them a solid. Maybe it wouldn't have been to getting them to 16th and being league average in the league in terms of defensive rating, or especially and even more so in the half court. But it could have helped them get timely stops. And those timely stops, if they're allowing themselves to get those kills that I'm speaking to, getting 3 stops in a row, in significant moments of the game to go on 8-0 runs, 5-0 runs, 6-0, 7-0 runs. Those little moments like that were just severely missing from their defensive process. Put that in tandem with them not being able to guard and contain at the point of attack at all, outside of Ryan Dunn, who's a rookie, and you didn't want to be tasking him with so much so early. Put that in addition to them getting Cody Martin late in the season and him having impact, but that's still not being enough for them to turn corners in a sustained manner. You see why the Suns struggled on the defensive end in this past season. And I imagine whoever it is that ultimately lands that Suns head coaching job is going to be someone that sees things through a specific lens on the defensive end of the floor, that's going to be looking to lean into a lot more versatility, having a switch big at the center position to put in tandem with other players on the court to where you can cross match, to where there's a shared IQ within the defensive principles and the general schemes that they're looking to defend to, and to just generally add more athleticism to the group and size. If they can find them a center that checks off those boxes, I don't think they repeat the same things that we saw kind of haunt them in the 2024-2025 season. And I also think in addition to that, valuing the point of attack and adding more defenders around Ryan Dunn to where he can not always have to be the end-all, be-all, and he can have other players to defend in tandem with him. All of those things will help to make them turn the corners that they're desiring to in the 2025-26 season and beyond. And if they can make that happen, that'll also put them back into the playoff race, which is where they're desiring to be going into next season. So there you have it on the defense from the Suns in the 2024-25 season. I'm your host, Stephen PridGeon-Garner. You can find me on Twitter at Stephen PG3. You can also make sure to like and subscribe to the video, leave comments below. And let's talk about the Suns defense from this past season and what you maybe hope to see from them in terms of free agency or via trades to turn the corners that they need to get back to that playoff race.